So far in this series, the failures of money have cost people their savings, their fortunes, and their peace of mind. Kings have gone bankrupt, speculators have been ruined, paper currencies have collapsed into worthlessness. But now we arrive at the darkest truth of all, because the cold, indifferent logic of money, when it collides directly with human life, can cost people something far greater than any fortune. It can cost them their very lives. This is the story of the Bengal famine of 1770, a catastrophe in which a truly staggering number of human beings died. And it is a story not simply of a failed harvest or of nature turning cruel. It is a story of how the ruthless, single minded pursuit of profit and revenue can take an ordinary hardship, the kind that people have always endured and survived, and turn it into an almost unimaginable horror. We ended our last chapter with a warning that the machinery of money can reach far beyond the world of wealth and fortunes and press directly into the most basic and essential of all human needs, food. Now we are going to see very clearly exactly what that warning means in practice, in one of the most tragic and sobering episodes in all of financial history. This is a difficult story to tell, but it is an important one, and it deserves to be understood. Let us begin by picturing Bengal as it was. In the 18th century, Bengal was one of the richest, most fertile, and most productive regions in the entire world. Situated in the northeast of the Indian subcontinent, it was justly famed across continents for its abundant agriculture, its fertile river plains, and its thriving world-class textile industry. Its fine clothes were prized and traded far and wide. This was not a poor or a barren land. It was a byword for wealth and plenty. But by the year 1770, something fundamental had changed about who held power in Bengal. It was no longer governed by its own local rulers alone. Effective control over this vast and prosperous region had passed remarkably into the hands of a private corporation, the British East India Company. Now we have met great and powerful companies before in our journey, most notably the Dutch East India Company several episodes ago. But this British company had, by this point, become something genuinely unprecedented in human history, something new and strange and troubling. It was no longer merely a trading business that bought and sold goods. It had gradually acquired, through conquest, treaty, and maneuver, the astonishing power to tax, to govern, and to command its own armies across enormous territories in India. Think carefully about what that means. A private, profit-seeking company, answerable to its shareholders, had effectively become the ruler of many millions of people. And here is the crucial point. Its primary purpose, its fundamental reason for existing, was never the welfare or the well-being of those millions of people it now ruled. Its primary purpose was profit, it was revenue, it was returns for its shareholders sitting comfortably far away on the other side of the world, who would likely never once set foot in Bengal. And now, into this situation came the disaster. Beginning around the year 1768, the vital monsoon rains, on which all of Bengal's agriculture depended, began to fail, and a severe deepening drought settled over the land. The harvests shrank, the crops withered in the fields. Now, this much, on its own, was a natural hardship, a cruel one certainly, but the kind of hardship that Bengal, like all agricultural societies, had faced before in its long history and had endured and recovered from. Drought alone was not new, but what happened next, what turned this ordinary natural drought into a catastrophe of almost unimaginable and lasting scale, was not the work of nature at all. It was the hand of man, and more specifically, it was the cold, remorseless logic of money. Here, right here, is the very heart of this tragedy. As the famine loomed and then took hold, and as the people began to go hungry, The company, focused above all else on protecting its precious revenues, continued to demand its land taxes from the increasingly desperate and starving population. Let that sink in for a moment. As people were beginning to starve, the demand for money did not stop, and according to many historical accounts, the company did not merely maintain these taxes at their existing level. In some respects, it actually increased the tax burden during this period, determined at all costs to protect and even grow its income, even as the very people it taxed could no longer feed themselves or their own children. Money, in other words, was being actively extracted, squeezed out from a population that was already beginning to die. And there was a second cruel mechanism at work, operating alongside the taxation: speculation. As grain grew scarce and precious, some traders, and reportedly some officials too, began to hoard it. They bought up the available supplies of food, held them back from the market, and in doing so drove the price of grain far, far beyond the reach of ordinary people. And here we confront one of the most important and disturbing ideas in this entire series. When food, the very thing people need to simply stay alive, is treated purely and coldly as a commodity, as just another item to be traded and profited from in the very middle of a famine, then the results can be lethal on a massive scale. Consider the terrible paradox. The grain still existed, there was food, but it was being prized as a tool for private profit rather than being distributed as a basic necessity for human survival. People starved not always because there was absolutely no food anywhere, but because they simply could not afford the food that was there. So the ordinary people of Bengal found themselves caught in a deadly closing vice, squeezed with no way out. On one side, a collapsing harvest and a failing land, and on the other side, a ruling company that kept right on taxing them regardless, and a market that had priced the remaining food far beyond what they could ever hope to pay. Trapped between these forces, the result was mass starvation on a truly horrifying scale. Now we must be especially careful and honest about the numbers here, because they matter, and because precision is not possible. Estimates of the death toll vary enormously among historians, and no one can state a single reliable figure with confidence. But by many accounts, a huge portion of Bengal's entire population is thought to have perished in these years, with the figures most often cited reaching into the millions. Whatever the precise and unknowable true number, it stands as one of the deadliest famines in all of recorded human history. Behind every one of those numbers, we must remember, was a person, a family, a name. Now, at this point, we must pause and be very careful and very fair in what we conclude. Let us be clear about the argument. Droughts are natural. Bad harvests happen everywhere and always have. Nature can indeed be cruel, and the failing of the rains was nobody's deliberate choice. That much is simply true. But the crucial, essential lesson of Bengal, the thing we must take from this darkness, is this: a natural shortage of food does not have to become a mass death event. It does not have to. The one does not automatically lead to the other. What transformed this particular drought into a catastrophe of such staggering scale was not the weather. It was a system that consistently prioritized revenue and profit over simple human survival, a government in the form of the company that kept right on taxing the starving, and a market that was allowed to let food be hoarded and priced entirely out of the reach of the hungry. These things, unlike the drought, were not acts of nature, they were choices, choices made by people and driven at every step by the cold logic of money and profit. And this is precisely what we mean, what we truly mean, when we say that money made this famine. It is not that money summoned the drought, of course. The failing of the rains was nature's doing, but the sheer, terrible scale of the death that followed was, in very significant part, financial in its origin. It was the direct product of extraction, of a ruler coldly treating an entire suffering population as nothing more than a source of revenue to be collected, and it was the product of a market that was permitted to treat human survival itself as just another opportunity for speculation and gain. Nature lit the spark, but the logic of money poured on the fuel. The Bengal famine, in time, caused such deep and lasting shock that it slowly fed a growing tide of criticism against the company's rule and against the very idea that such immense life and death power should be left in the hands of a distant, profit driven corporation, accountable only to its shareholders. It would take time, but sentiment would eventually turn. The famine stands permanently as one of history's most brutal and unforgettable lessons in what can happen when the vast machinery of money and profit is allowed to operate without conscience and without restraint over the lives of the poor and the vulnerable. And tragically, painfully, Bengal was not to be unique. The dangerous idea that economic rules and financial doctrine should be allowed to override the simple, human, moral imperative to feed the starving would appear again in history. It was not a one time horror. In the century that followed, another great famine would strike, but this time it would happen much, much closer to the very heart of the empire itself. It would happen in Ireland, and there, chillingly, the driving force would not be raw, naked greed alone. It would be something perhaps even more disturbing and harder to comprehend. It would be a belief, a rigid, unbending economic ideology, sincerely held, that would stand back and allow a people to starve in the name of principle. And that is where we go next. If you're enjoying the journey, appreciate it if you subscribe, like, and share your thoughts.